Nothing But the Truth. Hello, I'm Raj Chengap of India Today and your host for Nothing But the Truth. This is my weekly X-ray of key issues that matter to you without holding back on the truth. The roar of fighter jets, the boom of guns, the menacing buzz of drones, and the chilling, whistling sounds of missile launches may have fallen silent, but the sixth war between India and Pakistan since independence is far from over. Most experts see the current truce as a tenuous one. With none of the key issues between the two countries resolved as yet, there is every chance of a resumption of hostilities between India and Pakistan. As Prime Minister Narendra Modi, in his address to the nation on May 12th, said, and I'm quoting him, "We have just suspended our retaliatory actions against Pakistan's terror and military camps. In the coming days, we will measure every step by the criterion of the attitude Pakistan adopts going ahead." A clear warning to Pakistan. And as a top official told me, Operation Sindu has been paused, it has not ended. What Prime Minister Modi has done is to draw thick new Sindu red lines in India's dealing with Pakistan. So in this episode of Nothing But the Truth, we will look at what are these new red lines that India has drawn and what to expect in future. Will we soon see a resumption of hostilities between India and Pakistan, or will better sense prevail in Islamabad and force them to shut the terror tap? Now let's start with the new red lines that Prime Minister Modi has drawn in India's dealings with Pakistan, or as we call it, the new Sindu lines that have been made by them. It was just 2 years into his first term when Prime Minister Modi pivoted away from his predecessor, Dr. Manmohan Singh's policy of strategic restraint against Pakistan's terror transgressions. Prime Minister Modi shifted decisively towards punitive deterrence. So what in effect we are seeing is a policy that is being implemented as soon as Prime Minister Modi came to power, and that meant henceforth, as soon as he came to power, and you could see the actions that happened after that, henceforth Pakistan would have to pay a blood-for-blood price for any misadventure it dared to undertake against India. Now, India's fresh resolve was evident soon enough when, in response, if you recall, to a terror strike at an army camp in Uri in September 2016, the Prime Minister Modi ordered surgical strikes across the line of control, or LOC as we call it. Then again, 3 years later, in February 2019, the Prime Minister cleared Air Force jets to strike a terror camp in Balakot right inside Pakistani territory after a car suicide bombing in Pulwama killed 40 personnel of the Central Reserve Police Force, or the CRPF. Then he made another big move, and this was shortly after being elected Prime Minister for the second time. Prime Minister Modi in August 2019 took the watershed step of abrogating Article 370, which, if you recall, had bestowed special status on Jammu and Kashmir. That put a formal closure on Pakistan's dubious claims over the valley. Now let's come up to date, and following the Pahalgam attack on April 22nd this year, the heinous attack against tourists, which saw 26 innocent lives being taken, Prime Minister Modi drew an even thicker red line in dealing with Pakistan-backed terror attacks. The result, as you can see, has been what I would call a quantum jump in punitive measures against Pakistan. Now, External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar says that these are based on three simple principles. Now, soon after the Pahalgam attacks, he told major powers, he talked to them personally and said, and this was before the war broke out, that firstly, India's retribution against terror would increase exponentially, which meant Balakot plus, because that was the last time we hit Pakistan hard. Secondly, he said, both terrorists and their sponsors, which means Pakistan, would be held accountable. And thirdly, India would ensure that they were brought to justice. These were the three principles that Dr. S. Jaishankar, the External Affairs Minister, had enunciated to all the world powers that he spoke to, because there was a lot of concern as what India would do after the Pahalgam attacks. Then India decided to employ what it calls multiple vectors. I've added one more to it, and they talked of three, I'm talking of four, and these are political, military, economic, and psychological, to achieve these objectives, which is to tell Pakistan that there are new red lines or new Sindu lines that have been drawn, and I'm going to talk of each of them. And if you look at them, first is, after the Pahalgam terror attack, India had already exercised the political option when it decided to suspend the 65-year-old Indus Waters Treaty. If you recall, this had survived 4 wars, and now India had begun to suspend it and possibly abrogate it at some time. The waters of the Indus River are critical for Pakistan's agriculture needs, especially for the politically powerful provinces of Punjab and Sindh. Remember, these are the two provinces where a majority of the population reside, and this is what makes it very, very tough for Pakistan. Though, let's be clear, the suspension of the treaty does not immediately stem the flow of water, but India's threat of reviewing the treaty puts tremendous psychological pressure on the Pakistani leadership. So they've employed, as I've told you, there were 4 vectors. They've already employed in terms of the political vector, hitting at the Indus Water Treaty and suspending it, and then, of course, the psychological pressure that puts in, because the water is such a vital resource for the provinces of Punjab and Sindh in Pakistan. Then let's come to the military options, and here Operation Sindur was a demonstration of the decisive force with which India would strike. Now, in his fiery and tough-talking address to the nation, Prime Minister Modi defined these actions as the new normal. Remember that word, the new normal, in India's fight against terror. Now, I spoke to a top official involved in the decision-making process, and this is what he told me, or the definition of the new normal. He said, we are now going for the head of the snake, not just the foot soldiers. We have also sent them, and he's talking of both the terrorists and their sponsors, which in this case is Pakistan. We've also sent them a clear message that there is no place where you can hide, and that no matter where you are in Pakistan, we will hit you. That was the first thick red line that India had drawn, that they're going for the head of the snake, and no matter where they hide, wherever they are in Pakistan, India will go ahead and hit them. Now, Operation Sindur was a clear embodiment of India's new tough approach, and on day 1 of the war, the Indian armed forces targeted key terror hideouts, hitting not just those in Pakistan-occupied Kashmir, or POK as it's called, but in the Punjab province, the sensitive Punjab province, which is the very heartland of Pakistan. Remember, this is for the first time since the 1971 war that airstrikes were used to target places in Pakistan, and in this case, the headquarters of 2 key terror outfits. And when I say places in Pakistan, I meant Punjab. We did hit in Balakot, but that is in KPK province. The Punjab is politically the most sensitive province. It is also harbors the capital of Pakistan, which is Islamabad, and the other big city, Lahore, which is the nerve center of Pakistan's business. And of course, let's not forget Karachi, but Lahore is very, very important. And in this province is when both the airstrikes, both the key headquarters of the terror outfits, the Jaish-e-Mohammed in Bahawalpur and the Lashkar-e-Taiba were struck. The Lashkar-e-Taiba in Murudke, its headquarters is near Lahore. And both these very, very critical headquarters of these terror groups, the LET and the Jaish-e-Mohammed, the JEM as it's called, both of them were targeted, and these both are in provinces in the Punjab province, and these were targeted for by Indian Air Force strikes that was there on the very first day. So, as demonstrated, India said that it would go after the head of the snake, and they went after the headquarters that is there and killed in that some very critical terrorists that really hurt the JAM in particular, and we know that there's been some damage also in the LET itself, but the message was significant, that there was no place to hide. Another element of Prime Minister Modi's strategy was calling Pakistan's nuclear bluff. Now, normally what Pakistan would do, as they've done now, and we saw that action that was there, that after the first round of strikes by the two countries, US President J.D. Vance reached out to Prime Minister Modi on May 9th to inform him that Pakistan was going to dramatically escalate the war. Now, given that the two countries were nuclear armed, both India and Pakistan have nuclear weapons, the US Vice President's concern was that events were moving rapidly up what is called the escalation ladder towards an all-out war that between two nuclear neighbors could have disastrous consequences. So this is what Pakistan always talked about, that if India strikes Pakistan hard, it will go for its nuclear weapons, and that would mean the end of the subcontinent as we know it now. And I'm not exaggerating. If two countries use their nuclear weapons, we will eviscerate many of our major capitals, and that is what the threat that Pakistan always held out. But this time, Prime Minister Modi remained unmoved and told Vice President Vance very firmly that India's fight back or strike back would, in his words, the Prime Minister's words, be far more forceful, stronger, and devastating. That was the words that he was reportedly told Vice President Vance when the Vice President expressed his concerns, and I'm repeating it, far more forceful, stronger, and devastating. The Prime Minister reinforced this point in his address to the nation, making it clear that India will not tolerate any nuclear blackmail and will strike decisively. He then went on to add that India would not discriminate between the government sponsoring terrorism and the masterminds of terrorism. That means he would hit both of them. This was the kind of firm warning, and he demonstrated that immediately, a day after Pakistan launched drone and missile attacks on 36 different locations on India's western border, in the belief that they will, in some senses, threaten India and force India into some sort of reconciliation. India refused to do that and unleashed what one official called Hellfire. And this was when the Indian Armed Forces launched precision strikes on 8 key bases, damaging runways and communication facilities in Pakistan. Remember, 8 key bases, air bases that India struck, and this included the one at Noor Khan, which is located between Islamabad, which is Pakistan's capital, and Rawalpindi, the headquarters of the Pakistan Army. Now, with India demonstrating that it could strike Pakistan at will, including the nerve centers of its government and army, Pakistan's leadership, as a senior official puts it, cried uncle. Now, this is a phrase, cried uncle, which means that Pakistan rang the US for help. The US is seen as the uncle for them because every time there is any hostilities that break out between India and Pakistan, they run to the Americans to bail them out. Now, this official believes that the devastating airstrikes done by India convinced Pakistan that the war would only go downhill for them from now on. And therefore, Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif and Army Chief Asim Munir reportedly spoke to the US Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, asking the US to intervene and to get India to stand down. Now, again, this is in the realm of speculation because there is no official confirmation of that. These two had apparently claimed, to Rubio in this case, that if an all-out war did break out, Pakistan would be forced to use all its options, which they then hinted may even include bringing in nuclear weapons to the table. No confirmation on this matter, but it is speculated that this is what they had warned Marco Rubio when he called them up on May 10th morning. Rubio is said to have then spoken to Jaishankar the same morning, within hours of him speaking to Rubio speaking to Asim Munir, the Pakistan Army chief, and Jaishankar told Rubio that Pakistan was to blame for moving up the escalation ladder. He pointed out to Rubio that as a counter-strike to the Pahalgam attack, India on its first strike on May 7th had targeted only terrorist hideouts and deliberately avoided hitting military targets, giving very, very clear indication that India was not in favor of escalating the entire strike back that was there. Apparently, and this is again on record, within 15 minutes after the first wave of strikes by India, the first wave of airstrikes on May 7th, and of course other strikes across POK, Lieutenant General Rajiv Ghai, the India's Director General of Military Operations, or DGMO, had even called up his Pakistan counterpart, Major General Kashif Abdullah, and told him that India had no intentions of launching further strikes. This is within 15 minutes that night of launching major strikes, 9 strikes across Pakistan. But General Abdullah apparently told Rajiv Ghai or General Ghai to go to hell, that's what they say, and said that Pakistan would retaliate soon. Now, in his conversation with Marco Rubio on May 10th, that's a critical date when the ceasefire or hostilities cease for the moment, External Affairs Minister Jaishankar is said to have told Rubio that if Pakistan wanted a truce, then it should use the DGMO hotline to do so. So soon after, Pakistan's DGMO Abdullah called his counterpart, Rajiv Ghai, General Ghai, and told him that Pakistan wanted a ceasefire. General Ghai consulted his seniors and by 3:35 p.m. informed Abdullah that India had agreed. Now, that's how the 88-hour or 4-day war between India and Pakistan, the 6th war since independence, came to an end, even if it was amidst a host of claims and contradictions. Now, one contradiction is, why did India agree to pause all hostilities if it had, as it claimed, the upper hand? It's a good question. So why did we say, okay, we'll stand down now? Now, when I spoke to official sources, they said the main reason why India took the exit ramp, as it is called, is that Pakistan, and that is what Pakistan had asked for, it was because India had never wanted it to be an all-out war. India's objectives were to communicate to Pakistan that enough is enough and to take punitive action against terrorist organizations that had launched attacks on India in the past 25 years. They achieved that in full measure. In fact, on the first strike itself, and even warned both Pakistan and its terror cohorts of stronger action if they continued with their nefarious agenda. So in India's mind, their main strikes, which is to hit at the headquarters of the terror camps, as well as demonstrate to Pakistan that if they retaliate, we would strike them very hard, which they did in that 4-day war. They then decided that India was not interested in an all-out war. It had proved its point, and therefore it agreed to have a ceasefire or to end hostilities. However, and this is where the story gets complicated, to India's great dismay, American President Donald Trump posted about the ceasefire on social media even before India and Pakistan had formally announced it, and he went on to claim full credit for orchestrating it. To make matters worse for India, Secretary of State Marco Rubio put up another post on X this time, claiming both India and Pakistan had also agreed, and I'm putting in quotes, to start talks on a broad set of issues at a neutral site. Now, Trump's trumpeting continued too, as he proceeded to boast about preventing a nuclear conflict, and he called it a nuclear conflict in the subcontinent in one social media post, and in another talked of working with leaders of both countries to see, and as he put it, if after 1,000 years a solution can be arrived concerning Kashmir. Not only did the US president end up rehyphenating India with Pakistan, but adding insult to the injury was Trump equating India, which is the victim of a terror attack, with its perpetrator, Pakistan. Now, I spoke to Ashley Tellis, senior fellow at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace and considered a top expert in South Asian issues, and he believes that contrary to popular notions, both India and Pakistan went into the war reluctantly. Now, Tellis told me, and I'm quoting him, the turning point came when both sides believed that from their vantage point, they had done enough damage to each other, and to signal that the provocations will not go unanswered. At some points, he puts it, your objectives for war shape your choices. It's a very interesting phrase, your objectives for war shape your choices. And in that context, the US intervention made a difference by persuading both that they had done enough, both India and Pakistan, that they had done enough, and may regret any further steps that they may take. And Tellus goes on to tell me that for that you should give Rubio full credit for staying the course. Of course, Ajay Bisaria, a former Indian High Commissioner to Pakistan, disagrees with what Ashley Tellus asserted, and he told me, and this is his quotes, "Let's be clear that India has achieved its objectives of both accountability of terror perpetrators and the setting up of a credible deterrence against their sponsors, which is the Pakistan state. It's military action and not US intervention which was the main catalyst for Pakistan to ask for the ceasefire." So he is very clear that it was not the US intervention, but it was the military action taken by India that forced Pakistan to ask for a ceasefire. And now this is the official government approach, and this is what the government states in all its discussions, including with the Member of Parliament, that it was not US intervention, but it was India's own military strikes that forced Pakistan's hand and to ask them to cease hostilities because they knew they were going to lose the war. The problem was that the American leadership's loose statements made it look as though India had yielded to US pressure. It did not seem to support the narrative that it was Pakistan that had pleaded with India for ceasefire because of its mounting military losses. Now, as blasphemous for India was Marco Rubio's statement about talks at a neutral place, disregarding India's steadfast policy of not entering into a dialogue with Islamabad till it stopped sponsoring terror. And that has been a policy now for close to 10 years. Worse for India, Trump wanted to insinuate himself into the Kashmir space when India had made it clear that there would be no more discussions with Pakistan on the status of the valley after the abrogation of Article 370. Now, Pakistan claims that it has achieved its aims, and for General Munir, the army chief, the ceasefire, he made it out to seem that Pakistan had scored against India, it had given India a fitting retort, and that is the propaganda that is being employed in Pakistan. And therefore, in many senses, General Munir has asserted himself and demonstrated this is the belief that is coming out of Pakistan, that he has demonstrated that the army is indispensable and therefore him, and he has consolidated his holding. Remember, we had called General Munir a jihadi general in one of the issues of India Today, and the fact that he would be a difficult customer to handle, as it proved, he has, in some senses, established his own standing, but not without a huge cost to Pakistan, which India has made Pakistan to pay. And if you look at the way Prime Minister Modi has handled this entire set of things, and in a very, very calculated move, his speech, in fact, indirectly dismissed Trump's assertions. Remember when Prime Minister Modi spoke to the nation on May 12th and said, India's stand is very clear. Terror and talks, terror and trade cannot go together. He also indicated that India would lift the suspension of the Indus Water Treaty only after Pakistan turned off the tap on terror, since, as he put it so eloquently, water and blood cannot flow together. Now, as for Trump's offer of mediating the Kashmir issue, Prime Minister Modi disregarded it, not directly, but said, I would like to tell the global community that our stated policy is, if there are talks with Pakistan, it will only be on terrorism. It will only be on Pakistan-occupied Kashmir. That was a very, very firm stand, refuting what both President Trump and Marco Rubio had talked about, and India made it clear that this was not what they had agreed upon, and this was not their policy. So, what does one expect next? Where will this end? Let's put it this way. Most experts see the current truce as a tenuous one, which I had mentioned earlier. And the reason is that none of the key issues between the two countries have been resolved yet, and there is every chance of a resumption of hostilities. And if you recall, Prime Minister Modi himself said in his address, we have just suspended our retaliatory action against Pakistan's terror and military camps. In the coming days, we will measure every step by the criterion of the attitude Pakistan adopts going ahead. Operation Sindu, as I'd mentioned earlier, has been paused. It has not ended. That is the official India stand. Meanwhile, news channels had said that, or quoting Modi government sources, said that the government had decided that from now on, every terror strike in India would be treated as an act of war. While it is not clear whether that is official policy, it is a risky strategy that could have India caught in a militaristic frame when it should be focusing more on economic growth and beefing up its intelligence and surveillance networks to thwart terror strikes. Now, Michael Kugelman, a US-based South Asia specialist whom I spoke to, told me, we have a very fragile piece in place. The core drivers of this crisis and those before it have not been dealt with. That includes terror, it includes Kashmir, and the deeper levels of tension between the two, with increasingly sophisticated weapons and technology being used against each other, as we saw in the recent war, the Sixth War. The crisis shows that the two countries are primed for another round of hostilities sooner rather than later. That's Kugelman's estimate of what is going to happen, or assessment of what is going to happen. The Modi government, of course, is aware of the risks and has instructed the three services to be on full alert. Each of them have begun evaluating the outcome of the war and assessing their strengths and weaknesses. India also knows that Pakistan is doing the same and deduces it will persuade China, Pakistan will persuade China and Turkey to strengthen its ability to combat India's air power, since it knows it cannot match India's naval prowess. It is also clear that having targeted terror outfits in which the JM chief Masood Azhar's kin have been killed, India can expect them to regroup for a big strike. It is worrying that India has so far not been able to nab the Pahalgam perpetrators even close to 3 weeks after the incident. That is something we need to look at. And Harsh Shringla, former Foreign Secretary, told me India needs to focus on its intelligence and security apparatus and enhance those capabilities. We also need to bring tourists back to Kashmir, he says, and defeat the aims of these terror groups by ensuring foolproof protection. This is essential, as India needs to focus on getting massive investments to fund its ambitious economic growth targets. Now, the argument put by a lot of experts is that frequent hostilities would breed an uncertainty which will be detriment to India's larger interests. So there is a group that argues that having proved its point against Pakistan so forcefully, it is now not in India's interest to go in for an all-out war, because India has much, much bigger stakes. It must move towards the kind of ambitious growth that Prime Minister Modi has envisioned for the country, and therefore any derailment of that process, any uncertainty that is there could impact India's economic growth. That is not to argue that we should remain silent if another Pahalgam attack comes. Of course, we should strike, but the ability, the titration of that and the way we handle that crisis is going to be critical for India's economic growth as well. And I'm sure Prime Minister Modi knows that as much, and that is one of the big reasons why we did not go for an all-out war, despite having the advantage that is there, because we need to protect our economic interests, having proved the point against Pakistan. There are other measures that India can take, and I spoke to Sharat Sabharwal, another former Indian High Commissioner, and he told me that we should start mounting diplomatic pressure on Pakistan. And with Pakistan's economy in tatters and surviving only on the intermittent tranches from the International Monetary Fund, India should get the IMF to make their disbursements concomitant to good behavior from Pakistan. Meanwhile, as we have seen, the Modi government has formed 7 multi-party delegations of parliamentarians and retired diplomats to visit close to 33 major countries and brief them on India's concerns about terrorism and why India will be forced to take even tougher punitive actions if Pakistan remains recalcitrant. So the message to the world is India will remain tough. The world also should now move in to curb Pakistan's nefarious activities and put them on the path of development rather than remain recalcitrant as it is now. So the fight goes on, but on different types of battlegrounds for the moment, hopefully not on the actual battleground in the near future. Let's be clear, India-Pakistan relations have always been somewhat of a roller coaster ride with, as we have seen, unexpected twists and turns. Who thought that the war would end so quickly just when it seemed headed for a no-holds-barred conflict? Sometimes the unexpected can be a positive one too. That is the only silver lining to the dark clouds that continue to hover over the Indian subcontinent. For more details, you can read my cover story on the subject in the latest issue of India Today. Thank you for being with me in this episode of Nothing But the Truth. I look forward to having you with me next week. Nothing But the Truth.